Hello everyone. Let's get into the fast API client server authentication video. So we are going to explore different ways of securing APIs and client server implementation and pros and cons of each authentication model. So right now uh, our focus is basic authentication. Basic authentication when to use. In this series, we are going to explore different ways of securing APIs. We shall start with simplest method, basic authentication now.
Basic authentication intro.
Let's cover what is basic authentication is and how basic authentication works in behind the scenes and when to use it, the pros and cons, and finally I will show you how to implement in Python using request library.
By the end of this video, you will understand how basic authentication works and where it fits in the bigger picture of API security. What is basic authentication?
Basic authentication is an HTTP based authentication mechanism that sends the user credentials, specifically the username and password, in HTTP request header.
These credentials are base64 encoded and included in each API request.
Now, keep in mind base64 encoding is not encryption. It is simple way to represent the data in different format. Anyone who intercepts the request can easily decode it and read the username and password, which is why basic auth is only safe when used over HTTPS.
How basic auth works?
Here is what happens step by step in a typical basic authentication flow. The client sends the request to the server with a special authorization header. The header looks like this: authorization basic space within angular brackets base64 of username colon password. For example, if username is user1 and the password is my password, the string will be user1 colon my password gets base64 encoded. So the header might look like this: authorization colon basic and that your encoded content, encoded string. Okay, the server decodes the header and checks if the credentials are valid. If they are valid, it processes the request, otherwise, it returns a 401 unauthorized error.
Tech insights.
This is a stateless authentication method. There is no session for token maintained between the client and server. The credentials are sent with every single request, which makes this method very simple but also less secure.
Security tip: never use basic authentication over plain HTTP. Always combine it with HTTPS to encrypt the data in transit. Even then, it's better suited for internal systems or services where you control both client and server. Pros and cons of basic auth. Advantages of basic auth.
It is easy to implement most programming languages and HTTP clients have built-in support. It is stateless. There is no need for server to remember sessions. And basic auth is suitable for a quick prototypes, internal APIs and testing environments.
Downsides of basic auth. Nothing but disadvantages.
It sends credentials in every request, increasing exposure of credentials. It relies only on basic base64 encoding, which is not secure. This basic auth without HTTPS, credentials can be easily intercepted. In basic auth doesn't support for token expiration roles or user context, Basic Auth is not suitable for production grade applications or public APIs.
When should you use Basic Auth? Basic Auth good for
It is good for internal APIs, quick test setups, legacy systems, local development.
Basic Auth avoid in
You should avoid basic auth in production environments, public APIs, application handling sensitive data, scenarios needing user roles, session expiration, or audit logging. Such scenarios avoid basic auth.
Let's now see how to use Basic Auth in Python. We will use the popular requests library. In the next slide, we can see basic example of how a client would authenticate with a server.
Yeah, let's go to the code section.
Python code using Basic Auth client. Here is an example of how a client.
Yeah, this is a sample code, but we will run a live session and write the code and run that so that we will understand whether it is good along with the server. So client alone cannot work, right? So we are going for a next section.
What happens behind the scenes? Just to give you an idea of what under the hood, here's what authorization header might look like after encoding.
Yeah, here you see here where simply if we write our own code of what is happening, this encoding and all. So what do you say? Import base64 user ID password. You are creating user1 colon my password. We are creating a string, right? So base64 dot base64 encode of this particular user pass dot encode. You will pass this encoded content into base64 encode and you convert that to decode. So that encoded content will come. If you print simply, that will come. This is exactly what the request library does internally when you use HTTP basic auth. You can see here in this code, we are using this request library and request under the request library HTTP basic auth we are using. So which we are passing inside request library dot get authentication is called HTTP basic auth and we are passing this username and password. This whole story will happen inside basic auth. Okay, yeah.
Next steps, REST API server in Python. Now that we have seen the client side in part 2 and 3, we will run the code and also we will build a REST API server using fast API and implement basic authentication there, which including how to.
So in the next sections we will include how to extract the authorization header, decode the credentials manually, validate them against a list or user store.
This will give us a complete client server view of basic auth works in practice. Summary, let's quickly recap.
Basic auth sends credentials in the header on every request. It's simple but not secure unless used in HTTPS. It should never be used for public production APIs. Great for a quick testing and internal tools, this basic auth. And basic auth easily implemented in Python using request library. We saw the code also.
Final note, in the upcoming videos we will cover more how other auth styles works, when to use it and what interviewers expect you to know. Let's learn authentication simple way and interview ready.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe for more Python plus Fast API content and let me know in the comments if you want real project examples in using Fast API. Thank you.